What is going on, you guys? It's your boy, the Blue Skin Bandit here, and we are back with episode 139 of the video game therapy series. I am currently about at X430Z negative 26,700. I'm filming another Let's Play video or just clips of it, and this one's kind of an exploratory episode, but I'm having large swaths of time where I'm just kind of running, trying to find this woodland mansion that's apparently just a hell of a long way away. But I'll eventually get there. But I figured I might as well try to record one of these while I'm traveling because I have nothing else to do. And besides listening to the silence, I mean, I do kind of like there is some nice catharsis in silence. It really doesn't bother me doing things in silence. But I am tempted a lot of the time to have like either playing music or try to listen to somebody, some kind of podcast or something. It seems stupid to just like retrain my own AI with me talking. So like if I listen to my own podcast, that just seems fucking moronic. I really don't. And every time I end up like not even. It's not even like I like doing it. It just I don't know. I'm mostly just listening to find new ways to criticize myself or I don't know, discover more things I should be more, self conscious about. I do think that I actually have rated. I feel like suspecting that I've actually been to this woodland mansion before, even if it is super far away, because I'm noticing that I feel like a lot of this stuff seems looted. Like that didn't have a buried treasure map for some reason. But I do want to see. Looks like I want to get these armor trims. That's the whole goal of the episode is to get the armor trims. So I got to kill these guys to get one of them. But anyway, I don't know. It's real chaotic times. I feel like that's always just like, there is kind of this camp of person that is this. Oh, did he give it to me? Damn it. This camp of person like that just kind of believes, and maybe there's merit to this too, that like just nothing ever changes. Like the more things change, the more they stay the same. Which I do, I do find that there is an element, a compelling element to that. It's not that I totally agree with that, but it does feel like no matter what happens, the sun will rise again. There's not really, and there's the whole thing where it's, there's nothing new under the sun. Um, these I feel like are, there's merit to that argument. But at the same time, it always just does feel like this is an extenuating circumstance, and there are kind of crazy things happening, for lack of a better word. Um, but I don't know. I do tend to think that I'm probably closer to the nothing ever happens kind of guy than like this moment in particular is important. And the other problem is you don't even know. You're not going to know in advance when said important thing or actually important thing does happen. So it's not really even worth predicting otherwise. Like it's not it's not helpful to be I don't know, to be panicked about it because it's I mean, I don't know, there's not ever, especially with the I don't know how we're using technology. I'm not saying technology is this way, but how we have decided collectively to use technology, it doesn't ever like, give us reason to be optimistic. And I've said before that I think that'd be an interesting idea to have like I guess like I guess you can call it like a newspaper or some kind of like feed where you'd only get positive news. But the other issue is like there's always a way to like spin it into something negative. So an example would be like, oh, local dog is saved from burning fire, and then somebody, kind of the moron would be like, oh, it's like nice they saved a dog, but then like some other person's like, well, oh, so a dog gets health care, but I don't, something like that. Where it's not. There's always just kind of this negative, and I understand why people don't even bother to even try to address, I guess only focus on the good things. Because also people like tend to try to focus on the good things as a way of like where they think it's like a way of coping with like the bad things. It's like if you're just kind of like burying yourself in some hole of ignorance. And I don't know that that's super compelling to me either. I don't really know. I don't know. I think with I've made the argument before that in the past, information was hard to come by, so any kind of information would be, useful or valuable. But now, like, we live in this age of information gluttony, where there's too much information, you're not sure what to sift through. And so it's like impossible even to tell like what even is. There's some stuff that you don't really question is real, but then like how skeptical should you be, of things, knowing that like every any kind of claim that isn't just like some blatant opinion, like, oh, I like the color red or something. All right, I don't need to like fact check that, but surely there are. God damn, these things just don't ever drop. Um, there are plenty of things that I could say, or you could claim that like someone would be like, really, like that doesn't sound right, or like I want to fact check that or something. Especially like in the area of conspiracies, which there's kind of an aside on this that I want to cover. Um, I like anyone that thinks that there's no such thing as a conspiracy, I think is kind of an idiot, because inevitably something is a conspiracy until it's like proven true. So by calling anything a conspiracy, I think is silly. So I don't know that. I think it's just kind of like a derogatory term. It's just like, it's like calling a black person the N word. It's like that's not constructive. That's not even like it's not even like you're describing a particular thing. It's like it doesn't even really mean anything. It's just like you're just being rude, and it's just not even. And I'm not equating those two things. I'm not saying that a black person being called the N word is as bad as being called a conspiracy theorist or something like that. But to the same degree, where it's like a term that's just kind of derogatory for no other reason. And in the case of the N word, that there's a historical precedent to that. So I'm not disregarding that. But same with the word conspiracy as a whole. There's still like the historical precedent with that is like people who are these alien or scared of aliens, or I guess these like Joe Rogan people that hyperfixate on moon landing, faking, and stuff like that. Which I guess that's one sign that some people are doing well somewhere. Because if you have the energy to dedicate towards the faking of a moon landing, you're probably doing fine. I don't know that I need to have an abundance of sympathy for whatever you're going through. But yeah, the other side of that is like some people are trying to deny their whatever the hell's going on in their life that's I guess is bad enough to where you have to focus on the moon landing, or I'm sorry, the alleged moon landing, because obviously I don't think it's real. But still, I almost have sympathy for those people in the sense that it's clear that like if you're putting that much effort into that, you are either like a broken person or you're going through something difficult. And I think it's not really helpful for them, and to you can just call them a conspiracy theorist or something. And the other thing is like you don't even know what might turn out to be true. I've like made this joke, but like even just somebody like plainly describing reality sounds like just fucking absurd. And this is just based off of like the best information that we have is like, oh, like some apparently humble math teacher that is running a pedophile island in the Caribbean, blackmailing a bunch of politicians. Which again, many parts of that are as true as we know. That's like as true as anything else that we can validate. At the very least, it's like so unbelievably suggestive. It's like it's like if you were caught, with you had a girlfriend, you were caught with another girl with your pants down, like you're both in bed, and you're like, well, we tripped, and I felt it's like no judge is ever going to believe that. Like obviously we know what's going on. Like it doesn't take a moron, but like the fact that we don't have like, I mean, there probably is hard evidence somewhere, but I don't spend my days hunting it, or I'm not. It's just not something I get that invested in because it's what am I supposed to do about it? But even something like that sounds just fucking insane. And without like, I guess just the abundance of information that's available, you would sound like a conspiracy theorist. But again, that's the closest really approximation to reality that we have. But it almost seems reality now seems faker than like what I could make up. I couldn't make up a story that sounded as ridiculous as that. I mean, maybe I could. Maybe I just lack creativity, but that itself is just absurd. It's like on every level. I don't really know. There's not really a way that you could even trying to make that like a funny bit is like that's kind of as funny as it'll ever get. that's kind of ridiculous. Like every dimension that you add to that story was like, and again, I don't know the whole background of Epstein, so I don't really care, but I just know it's like a hot button issue. I guess the other thing to, riff more on, conspiracies and the end of the world, as if that's something I'm becoming an expert in. I'm not. I guess to clarify my position, which I've done several times, but I feel like I often need to do that, especially after I, go on some tangent. I'm, and again, I also hate to use words that like define me as certain things. Like if I even say like, oh, I'm a humanist, like, that's not like a decry of the scientific method. Or if I say, like I believe in science, which I'm not going to say that, but if I did say that like would then beg the question of like, what do you refer to as science? Or like, because then it's like when people say that, like, well, I believe in science, and then like you believe, which is kind of is like a religious word, in a method of inquiry, because that's really what science is. Science isn't a religion, unless, and there's the argument to be made that like, I think the religion of science is, materialism, whereas the religion of other religions are maybe more idealist in nature, where so like if you're unfamiliar with those terms specifically, materialist is like that everything can be boiled down to its constituent parts. So if you think that like, this is essentially like a revocation of like the idea of the human soul. Like the human soul doesn't exist. It's not a real thing. It's just like at some point we could boil down and figure out like what constitutes this human soul. Like that at some point would result in an answer that is, satisfactory. So either that's through, quantum mechanics or some, essentially you could science your way to describing any phenomenon that you have witnessed. Or there's some, again, kind of rational human explanation to things. Whereas idealism, and again, I might butcher if you're a pure philosopher and you don't just dabble in this. Idealism is almost this like pure solipsist thinking, where it's everything is kind of like a perception of, there is no one true reality. There is kind of this like subjective veneer that kind of doesn't really taint everything, but creates everything as into a subjective lens, where it isn't like we can say that there's an objective thing. And there are things that we could agree. It doesn't mean that this disagreement is inevitable and agreement is impossible. It just means that, the world as we see it is just within our own eyes. Now, there's obviously combinations of these philosophies that, are probably where most people fall into some combination. Like, someone who's like extreme idealist would say that, like, diseases aren't really real. Again, they're just, and of course, I guess in some sense it's just a word that we've made up to describe phenomenon. But they would say that, like, chemicals themselves are just things that, they don't do. It's like it would just basically discredit any of our like, our materialistic musings, where we're trying to deduce some conclusion based off of, again, the scientific method or a method of inquiry. Whereas idealists would think it's all kind of, they're like the pure hippies of the thing. And like the, there's different flavors of it. There's like the transcendental idealist, which I think Emerson was, at least in some point a part of. And, I think it's the one I have the most trouble with, or at least the one that I, have contention with, but despite maybe probably agreeing with it the most, is this very materialistic worldview. Not to say that I'm a pure materialist. I'm not. I think there's lots of flaws in materialism, both from a like an actual like philosophical merit perspective, like in terms of its merits and how useful it is in describing things, but also it's practicality. Like, is it really practical to believe that the essence of human consciousness is a clump of cells, and like deducing everything down. But people tend to use whatever weapon that they need for their argument, I guess, and they just find ways to bring up different elements of each of these, and they don't really stick to one strict philosophy when it comes to this. So, I think if you were a true, materialist, you'd have to essentially die on this materialist hill, where you'd say, like, there is no such thing as a soul. You'd have to reject the notion of a soul. which maybe some materialists might do. And then like on the certainty of there being no God, I think that is also kind of a materialist view, but I think that's kind of silly. It's like that's like it's almost like the justice system standard where like the absence of evidence is then the absence of guilt. Whereas like most people I think would believe that like, all right, well, just because there's not like enough evidence to like get a conviction, in the the legal standard, to put it that way, that doesn't mean that the person is innocent. There's obviously like times where somebody obviously killed somebody. I mean, OJ is a perfect example. It's like I think if you ask anybody who with half a brain, it's like of course he did it, but again, it didn't meet the legal standard, or you could call the judge an idiot or something. But regardless, there's still like that kind of truthhood and falsehood could apply to really any scenario. So there was this thing that I said towards the end of last episode, and I kind of like I said something, and then I almost realized that at least I felt it was like more profound and deserved more attention than I gave it. I just kind of like brushed past it. But I'm gonna I guess re-up that now and see if I can at least get back into that I guess mode of thinking. But I talked about the importance to have, instead of relative morality and this idea of absolute truth, meaning that things are absolutely true and the morals themselves are all like, they're much more contextual, and it's like here, like, give or take, like we don't really know. It's like, is it bad to murder somebody? Like, well, it depends, like there's that. And again, that's kind of painting black and white examples over this abstraction. But regardless, it's like the morals would be relevant or relative, and the truth would be absolute, meaning there is some idea of truth. But I think the more accurate and potentially, I think, useful way of abstracting this would be to begin to adopt a relative sense of truth. So truths are truth itself isn't really that. I mean, it's a meaningful concept, but it's not like an absolute concept. Whereas morality, I think, should be taken more, with more seriousness. Whereas, like, if you subscribe to this idea of absolute truth, I think it's easier to just kind of assign, the relative morality to be like, oh, it doesn't really, it's relative. It's like wishy-washy. We can kind of argue over it, but like, too bad, I guess. Whereas I think if you make something absolute, that is what the argument is about. So like if you're arguing about truthhood, like if you can't ever establish truth, but yet like the morals that you're applying, that you're using this truth to decide on, are also relative, then you don't really get anywhere. And then you can like make these, because you don't have the truth made up yet, we can't really decide, the moral parts of this argument yet, which I don't really find that to be a compelling way to go about abstracting problems. So I think kind of, as a society or something, switching from this idea of truth being this absolute, kind of like perfect good, or like even just not an impossibility, that's kind of the way I see it, it is, in of itself kind of a ridiculous thing. Like, I don't know that, something being absolutely true is ever really the case. Whereas morality is always just like, well, it's like, it's a good to have, as long as we know the truth. It's like, we can try to find what's moral about it. Whereas I think we should spend more time thinking about the morality and considering the morality of different things, independent of whatever, whether we're certain of things or not. Because I think the implications of morality go deeper than the implications of truth. I think at some point, if you, again, question enough and get in there, you kind of, you realize that truth itself is kind of a concept that, it's a comforting concept, but it's still not, it's certainly not absolute by any stretch of the imagination. But I don't know. I guess I'm not really sure who I'm trying to pwn with this crap. I talked about just one way of kind of dealing with not really problems. Problems is probably too relative of a word, but I guess just like trying to figure out what to do with your life. One answer that I think is a reasonable, thing to spend time doing is just trying to get like essentially replacing whatever, therapy or help with like skills, developing skills. Because like developing skills itself can be a very rewarding thing, independent of whatever those skills net you. And because we're very like I don't know, fatalist in terms of like, well, what does this do for me? It's I think it's easier to just try to dismiss skills as like only things that make you money, but there are many skills that I don't think that maybe you'll never make money from. Uh, but do you even get drops from these guys? I feel like you totally don't. At least I haven't gotten anything. I've killed like 10 of these guys. Uh, I don't know, whatever. Regardless, I was talking about skills. I think developing skills for their own sake and not having any kind of not having any, not even rationalization. You can rationalize this development of skill however you like, but I think using that as a way to, I guess, just fill up the time as you know, as you kind of allow your intuition to, decide things. Because I think people that also subscribe to this hyper rationality are very, they're very convicted in whatever it is that they have decided to do, and not in a way that is, I'll say is absolutely bad. It all really depends. But certainly a level that I'd always ask, like, are they sure that they're, like, how deeply have they considered, what they're doing, or like, why do they know why they care about this that much, or is there, is it really their, like, is it truly their calling? And I always wonder, and it'll never be something that, gets them like in the moment. It'll always be, 10, 20 years down the line, they might realize like, oh shit, I hate this, or I was doing this for this other reason, or just doing it for some pussy. People have their all kinds of their stupid ass reasons why they do things, and and not that I think everyone should spend all their time thinking about what to do before they do it. There is some element of like just, but giving your intuition time to do what they think, what it thinks is right. I guess the other side of that too, with like it's the metaphorical equivalent of like giving your brain time to digest ideas and things. Oh, I got it. Thank God. Holy shit, that took forever. Yeah, because we give our bodies. I mean, we should give our bodies more time, but in theory, we should be giving our bodies enough time to digest. God, that makes a huge difference. Our bodies time to digest food that we eat. So in the same vein, again, this is the metaphor that I'm extending here. We should give our minds time to digest, ideas that we're, struggling through, or especially like difficult questions that we're dealing with, especially questions of like what to do, what am I doing with, my time, or my life, or the people I'm with. These are like difficult questions, and there's not something that like, I don't think it's something you're going to answer with anybody else's input. I think these questions require, like, I'd almost do it like a school thing where it requires like, I don't know, 100 hours of solitary, quiet, meditative, thinking. And not everyone thinks, ideally like just, by themselves and quietly. Some people, think while they're doing things. Some people think while they're doing skills. So, the great way to do that is, all right, pick a skill to like get better at, whether that's, drawing, or I don't know, painting or something, build a workbench or something. Or a garden maybe, but then use that as kind of your time, to really meditate on things. And I think some people are so, I guess, caught up in what the world tells them to do and what they are instructed is important, and they haven't really taken time, not necessarily to validate what they're told is true and important, but to find out for themselves what they value, which I think is it can shock people if they're not. They're not, I guess, too honest with themselves. And I've kind of realized more and more that, like, honesty as I guess as like, I don't know how to, maybe like a governing principle, or just a principle itself that is in short supply, I think is, I don't know, I think so many of our problems, as humans and society writ large, comes from a dishonesty with oneself, where it's either things that somebody didn't, uh, wasn't honest with themselves when they're picking out a career, or they weren't, honest with their family and how they were being treated or something. There's all these histories that come back, and these people that, become these really fucked up people, like, for whatever reason, they just have these absurd ideas, I don't know, Peter Thiel doing a lecture on the Antichrist, which I can't even, again, that's like funnier than any bit I could ever come up with. I couldn't generate a bit that was that funny, or just that absurd. Like, what of all, like him of all people. But I think it stems from some issue with themselves, and of course, obviously, like you can blame them and say that, well, they didn't spend enough time in inquiry, and that is what I'm doing. I'm not saying I'm not doing that. I totally am. But at the same time, it's like I think instead of just like saying how bad that is, maybe try to learn and not fall prey to that same mistake. Meaning that okay, a lack of inquiry is going to cost somebody 8 hours of their life listening to an Antichrist lecture from probably the person who's closest to the Antichrist. I'm not sure if I could come up with somebody who was, a more fitting candidate for being the Antichrist. But again, you can blame him himself and like make it out to be like, oh, like this is just an evil person. But I think there's also like a lot to be said of, you know, power like that corrupts people. And, regardless of how true your intentions are when you begin something, once you reach a certain level, I guess to put it one way, like, tastes change. And all of a sudden, like, you like caviar and you know, think there's a master race or something. I don't know. Again, these people kind of go down these ridiculous rabbit holes, and where they end up, you're just like, this person's a crazy nut job. How did someone end up with it here? But again, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and I think it doesn't mean that you shouldn't, embark on some road, that you could potentially end up in hell with, but really just to be aware that, like, and to spend at least the time to do your due diligence to be like, all right, you know, how does this end up backfiring, or how do I ensure that I'm staying true to my to myself and I'm not gonna not even sell out, but just like I'm not gonna become the Antichrist or something. There's not people are so impatient. I guess that's probably one way to think about this. Is it's not that people lack that insight, but I think they're just so rushed. And I think the world, if anything, is trying to rush you to do things. Like, hurry up. Like, what are you doing? Like, why aren't you doing this yet? Like, and society and people don't help them with, whatever it is that, these arbitrary requirements, and, good people should be doing this. And like, these people make all this money. They're like, if you're in your 20s, listen up, do this. And they just watch these videos about how big of a piece of shit they are. And then, like, not only they feel bad, which prevents them from actually working, but that all that time they spent watching these dumbass videos are time that they didn't spend actually in inquiry with themselves. Which I do think is kind of the underlying, one of the things that is kind of a requirement to be, to truly be a thoughtful person, is you need time spent in inquiry, kind of listening to yourself, trying to figure out who you are. And maybe, you think that you figured yourself out. I would implore, I don't know, I just always implore people to explore further than they think and kind of dive into these things, to really make sure they know who they are when they're getting into things. Because that way you could also, kind of save the rest of the world from, potentially your bullshit later, So if you know that you're somebody that might become the Antichrist, at the very least, you can do us all a favor and not, try to avoid that fate so that we don't have to go attend your lectures. But, that might help you choose your career path better if you know that you're somebody that, I don't know, is easily influenced by power or something. So I don't know. And all that comes back to honesty with oneself. They talked about why, and like I say, like people and other philosophers and things, talk about why, like, Nietzsche himself was such a, such a valuable philosopher, why he was like so good. And it wasn't even that he was like, his writing was good. Again, I always say he's like the Trump of philosophers because he was very abrasive and whatnot. But I think the reason he was so good is because he was so honest with himself. Like, he looked so deep inward into like the core of his like worst of the worst desires and everything, and he just fought so deeply to get into himself. I think that is where like the truest truthhoods, again, of all this, of a relative truth, of course, are actually gleaned, is when you're like in the deepest of things. And Carl Jung even talked a little bit about like the importance of, not of depression, but at least, depression being used as a tool, in the development of oneself, like leaning into bad parts of your life. So let's say your life's not going well and things suck for whatever reason. I'm not going to theorize, but you know why your life sucks, or it doesn't, and you're perfect and good for you. I guess, we're jealous of you, the people who are trying to figure things out. Or at the very least, I would argue at least more honest with ourselves and saying that there are things that we still want. Because I think if you're like, well, I'm fine who I am. I just want like a Corvette. I'm like, all right, well, let's move 20 steps back. I think if it's some material good that you want, I think that you've never even achieved the level of self-reflection necessary to, appreciate material things. I think it takes almost an appreciation or a gravitas with the immaterial to then appreciate even stupid, trivial material things. But if you've never graduated beyond this, like, I want a Corvette because it goes fast, I don't know, you might be, that's far, above my pay grade to fix somebody like that. Regardless, I just forgot where I was going with this. Yeah, but learning who you are, as I was talking about using the depressive episodes as like a tool. Yeah, Carl Jung talked about this, where you would sink like deeper into a depression to learn, deeper truths about yourself, which I think is, is interesting and true. Not that I'm here to be establishing truth and falsehoods to that, but I think there's a lot of value in that idea. Get out of here. And people always look at depression or, sickness or something as, these inherently bad things, but I think there's a lot of benefit to derive from the very difficult things. I don't know of one person that I can even think of that. Now, part of this might be the bias of, like, I guess only knowing about people that are well known. It's like you wouldn't know somebody who's an unknown. But anyone who is well known and has done what, anything that anyone might call, like, consider cool or meaningful or important, almost none of them had these, like, perfect cookie cutter lives. Almost all of them had, like, they were really fucked up at some point, like either physically or psychologically, or the parents beat them. And we've all heard these stories 1,000 times. So I'm not saying that, like, you should, be a bad kid so your dad beats you up or something. That's not at all what I'm saying. But I'm saying there is a lot that, you can develop and learn about yourself. And I think the whole reason that, like, that is seen and that has, that archetype is so easily seen of people that, who've experienced crazy hardships being, the most successful, are because those hardships taught them truths about themselves that allowed them either to, more honestly pursue whatever their goals were, or, better define their goals, or even just like their anti-goals. I really think that, trying to do the opposite, or at least asking yourself the opposite question, is a very practical and powerful tool to, to see if you're going in the right direction. Like, so whatever you think you want to do the exact opposite. And, like, all right, well, how miserable are you? I guess. But just using, like, the opposite as, like, a metric to measure, what you are, where you're doing, and what you're working on with where you might want to go, especially if you're unsure, I think is a great tool. And I don't know where the origins of that came from. That's been something, I don't know. I feel like I've known that for a while now. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, let's see. What else do I want to talk about? Not really that much, but I guess I always got to fill up an hour with this, so you never know. Let me move to my document. Yeah, I guess there's this other, like, theory, this, like, collective consciousness theory that I've talked about before, but it's still worth another discussion. But the idea that, like, we all share some collective, which I guess is kind of true. And again, this is the sense where you can begin to, like, define things, to fit your narrative. Which I guess really, anyone's doing all the time anyway. So it's not like this is a new thing. But, I guess because the thing being that, like, biology has given us, essentially a, kind of like a skeleton of, a mind, and, like, all the human minds kind of not agree on things. Agree is kind of the wrong word, but understand a lot of the same fundamental truths. Like, again, barring, like, people with ridiculous, crazy philosophies that I would argue they're more, more nurture than nature. By nature, we all have these ideas that, like, we are conscious beings. Like, we exist in a physical reality, where at least the physical reality is a part of our reality. I'm not saying it is the only, but there, physicality is a dimension of our current reality. Um, and then, there are obviously questions about, causality. Like, we came from somewhere, presumably. How and what, are still kind of open questions in a lot of these things. Go south and you go this way. And so we kind of, understand those, basic things. And then, we have other ideas that, ranging popularity on, evolution. Like, did we evolve this way? Is it more of a, creator creationist thing? And the materialists, again, have their own philosophies on this, whereas I guess other people have theirs as well. But still, these are still things that we are generally drawn towards, and are things that we fixate on. Because it's weird that we don't spend as much time. Like, there are people that are crazy interested in like animals and kind of like the limits of our natural or artificial world. Like, even people that are fascinated, by benchmarking computers or something like that. Like, that's still technically an interest of some kind that is deep. But many people, myself included, are drawn towards these larger questions that are almost this futile. Like, they're unanswerable questions. Like, they're not like, do I honest to God think that I'll ever figure out, who or what or how or of any of the nature of the universe? Like, I'm never going to get to any of these, like any of the actual answers behind this. At the very least, it's like, all right, I need to like convince myself of some truth. But then the issue is, the deeper you go into this, into the hole, the more unsure you become of anything. Where it's like, you enter in, you're just like, oh, like, I'm not sure, science is great and I love science, but like, maybe is there anything else? Is science missing something? Is that a possibility? And then, like, however much longer later, depending on how long you're in this hole, you kind of like, I don't know if anything's real. Maybe the aliens did do 9/11 or something. You just kind of, it begins to escalate, and then you're almost better off if you're like, well, maybe I was better off and I was just a dumb kid that didn't know anything. That is kind of and I hate to get, regressionist on this and, to say that things, were better if you were just dumb kids, or to adopt like, a priori that ignorance is bliss, because I don't necessarily always agree with that. What is this guy? Never seen that guy in my life. Or that I guess the ignorance is always bliss. But yeah, there's truth to all of this, and that's the thing about, like, I guess with that thing I said by accident almost is, I think there is, truths are somewhat relative, and they're relative to how we understand and appreciate truth. And the other thing is just with believing things. Like, you could, even if you were solely convinced of a fact, like, this isn't necessarily, it's not really even meaningful until you've shared that fact with somebody else, which says something about, the sociality of our species, that we feel the need and desire to, share our insights with other people, and feel some sort of alienation if those, aren't shared or they aren't listened to or appreciated in some sense. Because I even said before that, like, if you, let's say I genuinely figured out the mysteries of the universe, like I actually figured, literally, I did not even make, like, again, this is hypothetical, but if no one ever believed me or no one listened, or I wasn't able to convince anyone else of, these truths that I experienced, even if I found them to be self-evident and other people would too, if nobody ever really considered, my opinions, there's no way that, I would be, I would be satisfied with that, and that, I guess that didn't go in vain. So there is kind of this, I don't know, an aspect of sharing that is quite important to humans, which is also interesting. But and I think people tend to use and justify our. Actually, I don't think I want to sleep. Use and justify, like, these very, like, obvious biological limits as, like, not to go this far, but to say, like, the reasons that humans shouldn't exist. Like, we shouldn't exist because, like, some humans are rapists or something, or we shouldn't exist because, we're stupid and we crave, human connection, and that's like, that's pussy shit, or whatever it is that people are trying to justify, their beliefs, and the transhumanists, I think, are the ultimate, in terms of being honest with themselves, they're the ultimate dishonest with themselves. They truly don't even convince themselves of anything. Does this have a thing in it? I swear it did. I don't know. Uh, but yeah, I think those of all people are truly the ones that are the true self deniers. Meaning they're just denying truths about themselves. They're just not listening to themselves. Not very honest. Because I do think that there is hardwired in our biology, again, to varying degrees, between various people. There is this kind of innate, there's an innate desire to reproduce, but then there's also a desire to like keep our species alive. This guy's kind of cool. Um, keep our keep ourselves alive, like a self-preservation engine. And you can just blame that on like biology being stupid and like, oh well, if we were better species, we would be robots that don't care about the self-replication. But even the robots that we've created these with AI are still ones that mimic our same self-preservation gene or whatever. So it's not even like we really solved that issue. Insofar as just codifying it in something that's a little bit more resilient and has more potential to be deceitful and to get around that. But I'm not really offended by our biological or even social limits. Fuck. God damn it. Like the idea that we need food to survive. Like I don't know why that seems to offend so many people. And not outright. I'm not saying if you asked, Peter Thiel or Zuckerberg or someone or anyone that is kind of in favor of this transhumanist thing or like, moving beyond humans. I'm not saying that they outright would say that, but they inherently that's kind of, it's implied from what their belief is. It's like it's the whole thing is like, all the evidence points towards guilt. It's like, well, you don't have any, it's like, but yeah, maybe I can't convict you, but you're still guilty in the people's court. And that's kind of the equivalent that I'm looking at this. I'm starting to think this thing is not even here, and I'm traveling 30,000 blocks for no reason. But I don't know. It can't be that far. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. I guess I was also thinking about. And this is kind of a crazy gear switch, but I don't know how else to segue. I probably should get better at segueing between different things. But cryptocurrencies as a whole is, it stems from this idealist concept where it's, at least again, the philosophy behind a cryptocurrency is one thing. Now how it's implemented is obviously much different. But I think there are cases, and this might be one of them, where oh shoot, a a botched philosophy, for lack of a better word, meaning that like the people that have co-opted the cryptocurrency movement as a way to grift and make money, potentially have soiled what otherwise might be a very useful, perhaps even interesting way to kind of evolve as a society. It's not physically evolving as a species, but it's evolving as a society. We're transitioning into a new way. Money, I guess. And as stupid as I think money is as a I don't think the abstraction's not stupid, but the implementation is stupid. This I don't know that you could qualify as any less stupid than our current incarnation. It's almost just like the worst of both worlds, where it's like, again, most cryptocurrencies besides like Monero and other ones are not like, have less privacy than cash, or especially less privacy than like a credit card. And the whole point was to get away with this having to check who you are to buy things, because it's always a slippery slope with any of this. So I don't know, but I don't know that I'm very bullish on cryptocurrencies. I think that they're, I think they, are an interesting project again, I guess to put that way. Oh, this one does have a hatch. I thought they did. But they're, but the way they're being implemented is just very scammy. I don't know that, I don't know that many of them will survive, especially like there being so many of them, like many different cryptocurrencies. There's not really any cohesion, and you could say that like I'm wrong because, it's just, Bitcoin is the only true cryptocurrency, but Bitcoin is not even the one that should be the one that's it's not like it's very traceable and it's not really like not even, and it's very mineable too. So like you should pick one that is A, not very mineable, um, and B, not very traceable. Which I think Monero would fit the bill more on both of those. Uh, I'm not saying I think Monero is the solution to every problem. There probably still is problems with Monero, and this problems just with adoption being a thing in general. Like, but I think the whole thing boils down. And it's almost the issue with everything. And I'm going to say this as a stupid person, as someone that is recognizing how stupid they are. Stupid people are the problem because they inherently just don't see things, or just misapply things in ways that bring out the absolute worst in something. And again, I say this on behalf of people that are stupid, or consider themselves stupid. Stupid people are the issue, and it always brings me back to that Osho quote, which Osho was like this. I brought him up before too. He's like this cult leader that, and he's not even interesting for any other reason that he had a funny quote. But he just says, democracy basically means government of the people, by the people, for the people. And then he pauses for like 20 seconds and then goes, but the people are retarded. It's just like, I think the reason he spoke so slow was that like they made him talk for like, and they didn't make him, but he would talk for like 8 to 10 hours. There's apparently some like, mandate of heaven thing, divine intervention. He's the God or something. But he would talk for like 8 or 10 hours. So in order to fill up the time, he just talked really fucking slow. And the clip of him saying that is like a minute and a half. I mean, it's just like, it's unfathomably slow. But there's a grain of truth to that too. And I'm not saying I want to single out like, I'm not obviously not defending anything he's ever done. But, the grain of truth in there I think is interesting. Is that like, if people are stupid, then how useful is all this, like, all these ideals? Like, ideals are great, and I think people need to live on ideals, but like, if the ideals only ever bring out like the dumbest among us, like, what, is there an ideal that counteracts it all, or are we stuck with that? Are we stuck with the dumbest implementation of the greatest ideas? Which is, I don't know, a very cynical and pessimistic perspective. It's like, oh well, it's always it's always the idiots that are the ones that ruin the fun for the rest of us. To put it that way. But I don't know. It's not interesting nonetheless. I guess the last thing I can just briefly mention, that I think is, I don't know, funny or symbolic in some very generic way, is like looking at a human skull. Not that I'm not a coroner. I don't look at human skulls. But a human skull, like, by itself, it's like we don't really think much of it, but it is interesting that of all the things that we, all our bones are internal for one, which I think is an interesting biological quirk, if nothing else. But also like, our motion for smiling is the same thing that the skull is kind of permanently resting in. Of course, it doesn't have lips or anything, so it like has to be smiling. But regardless, it still like kind of echoes this smile, and it either like says that, one way of looking at it is like, oh, you should be happy, and like that's why, because it's smiling because you should be happy. Or it's just kind of like laughing or chuckling, and it's kind of a reminder that, you know, we should not take life that seriously. That's it. That's really the whole, like, the real red pill in all of this is just that, like, the more seriously you take this and the more that, the more you run around with a gun in your mouth, it's like, is that really the way you want to exist? And like, say what you will about, uh, anything, but we still have some autonomy over how, what we choose to value and what we choose to, pursue in our lives. And if you like, fixate on this idea of absolute truth and that everything needs to make sense and we have to like right all these wrongs, and then like if we do something we should feel bad bad about it the rest of our lives, and it's just, or is there some element of just like, I don't know, we're all just kind of figuring this out, where forgiveness is kind of, is paramount, and we're kind of just making mistakes and learning things as we go, and then just enjoying the time that we have, and we're not really that focused on like trying to make the most of it, because it's the whole like, optimization issue where it's like if you're so focused on, looks like we're getting close. If you're so focused on optimizing things, you won't really, you'll fail to do anything. You'll just kind of sit there and do nothing. If you're like, well, what's the optimal thing for me to do? It's like, well, I don't know. Just do something. It doesn't have to be like, why does it need to be the perfect optimal thing every time? Why can't we start with just anything and then, just see where that ends up after a while, not permanently. Some people don't ever have direction at all. It's weird because I feel like I'm talking to two different types of people. Like the one person is thinking way too much and is spending all their time thinking. And that's, obviously a huge dimension of me itself. And then the other person is just like not thinking at all and just doing whatever the fuck. And it's just kind of, just jerking off, doing the same thing. It's like they're not thinking at all. Like they need to start thinking a little bit. And the people who are thinking too much need to stop thinking. So it's like, I don't know, depending on who you are, I guess take that advice and do something with it. It's just in time too, because we're coming in on my wooded mansion finally after 36,000 blocks. Yeah, but anyway, I don't know. It just kind of depends on what you need to hear and when you need to hear it. And I'm assuming you don't need to hear it from me, so I guess that's a fitting way to wrap up. But anyway, thanks for watching. Peace out. I'll see you in the next one.